Welcome back everyone to Formula 1 2023 and welcome to your race review for the Italian Grand Prix. As always, spoiler warning ahead here on Racing Reviews, and as always, if you are new, feel free to subscribe, hit that like button if you do enjoy, but it's a bloody hot day today here in the UK, so let's just crack on with it. Spoiler warning out of the way, here is your result. And after a titanic battle for the race victory throughout today's Grand Prix, it's 10 in a row for Max Verstappen. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, because titanic battle for the first 15 laps or so, and then he did what he has done all season long and just absolutely wiped the floor with everybody. History in the making, 10 out of 10 for Max Verstappen. That's 12 out of 14 for this year. Unstoppable. Sergio Perez was second with the two Ferraris in third and fourth. George Russell and Lewis Hamilton made it fifth and sixth for the Mercedes duo. A fun day for both sides of the garage. George, a bit more of a isolated Grand Prix, but Lewis was in the wars and lots to talk about the 7 world champion in today's review. More points and a season best drive for Alex Albon in 7th, fending off Lando Norris in 8th and Fernando Alonso in 9th. And Alfa Romeo in the points, Valtteri Bottas rounding out your top 10. We then move into the bottom half, and 11th place for Liam Lawson was not a bad day in the office, only 6 seconds off points, no safety car as well. Great drive from Liam Lawson. Oscar Piastri made contact with Lewis Hamilton, a big incident in the Grand Prix that we will definitely talk about in today's review. He finished in front of Logan Sargeant. I've not yet seen the footage of the incident he was involved with Valtteri Bottas, but Logan slapped with a 5-second penalty after contact with the duo. Guan Yu Zhou, a quiet day for him in 14th. Pierre Gasly, the lead. Alpine in 15th, Stroll 16th, Hulkenberg and Magnussen 17th and 18th. Ocon didn't finish and Yuki Tsunoda did not start. As always, we'll start right at the front with the two Red Bulls. What a day. What a day. And actually, I would argue that this race in particular was Red Bull's most screen time of 2023, because those opening 15 laps, crikey, was I on the edge of my seat. I was watching it so intently, like I've not done all year long. Last weekend in Zandvoort, yes, it was chaos. But actually, what we saw at the start of this Grand Prix was 3 different drivers separated by under a second each, fighting for the victory, with Sergio Perez and George Russell not far behind, and Max Verstappen in those early stages could not afford to make a single error. It turned out that the Red Bull really, in today's race, had more legs. It was much better on the tyres than Ferrari. Ferrari was definitely set up more towards a quali setup this weekend, and of course that paid dividends yesterday with pole for Sainz and third for Charles, and it's come away with a 3rd and 4th place, one of their best results of the year. So great weekend for Ferrari and all, but Max in those early stages, if he made a mistake, if Ferrari managed to get that undercut on the pit stop and pull it off with Max being boxed in between the two of them, could have been a very different race today. But Max kept a cool head for the most part, managed to get past Sainz after a lockup from the Spaniard, and darted off into the distance. Had a nice little fight with Lewis Hamilton when Lewis went really long on the hard tyres. But 10 out of 10, you do run out of superlatives for this man, and it's a question of what on earth is going to stop him. Because it doesn't seem like anyone else, regardless of the same car or another car, doesn't seem like anyone can stop him at the moment. It's going to be really fascinating to see if he can just continue to win every single race this year, because the rate he's going sure does look like it. And the title technically can be wrapped up next weekend in Singapore, but more likely it will be Suzuka, and even more likely it will be in Qatar. Sergio Perez on the other side of the garage, a strong weekend in the end for Checo, and there was a stage of the Grand Prix where he was 12 seconds behind Max, behind both Ferraris, struggling to get past George Russell. But actually, once he got past George, and there was definitely some scrappy moments between those pair, Sergio got on a roll and caught up with those two Ferraris, and for both of them really had to work hard to make overtakes. And we know that his outright pace isn't on the level of Max Verstappen, but actually the drive from Sergio today, with some extremely robust defending from drivers around him, they did not make it easy in the slightest for him to get past. I actually thought he was fantastic. He finished 6 seconds behind Max, and actually Max in those closing laps did slow down quite a bit, but I don't really want to read into that too much, because Max, for most of the Grand Prix, was on his own. Sergio had to fight this one. It was like being in the trenches. Everywhere he looked, there was someone trying to take him down, and he kept a level head this weekend. I think drove a brilliant Grand Prix, but a perfect day for Red Bull Racing. Ferrari, how do we feel about Ferrari? How do we feel? Because a pole position, a podium, a third and fourth place, jumping in front of Aston Martin in the Constructors. It's a good weekend, no? And you come to this weekend and you tell Ferrari that they're going to get a pole, they're going to get a podium. I think they bite your hand off at that, considering the up and down form they've had this year, considering they've been behind McLaren of late. Alonso and Aston Martin seemed to come back to life last weekend in Zandvoort. I think Ferrari take that, and both drivers gave it their all out there. That fight in the closing stages, and actually, scrap that, the entire race between those two drivers, it was like the Ferrari show today, and boy did they put on a show. It was excellent racing, wheel to wheel, sometimes crossing that limit, but just about keeping it within the rulebook, entering that sort of black and white line, that phasey part of the rules where some people are going to interpret it as over the line, double moves, too late braking. Others are going to put it as hard racing, and being in that zone is exactly where you need to be as a Formula One driver, and they did it. There were some scrappy moments, but crikey, did they put on a show for us. Charles Leclerc gave it his all to pass his teammate 2/10 off a podium at Monza. But both drivers, I think, can be happy. Sainz, a pole position in Monza. It's actually his first podium of the season. That's a story in itself. Well and truly deserved. Definitely in contention for driver of the day. But I don't think they could have done much more. That Red Bull car is too much of a machine. And though in a straight line, Ferrari had their number, actually it was tyre deg that really played the biggest part in today's Grand Prix, and that was the key. If you could look after your tyres in the Italian heat today, you were going to win the race, and Red Bull did that best. They've also got a quick car that helps them too, and two great drivers, but that's how they won today's Grand Prix. Ferrari couldn't hold on, and ultimately they settled for third and fourth. It was fifth and sixth for Mercedes. George Russell, a quiet race. Can we call it that? I think we can. Because he's finished 12 seconds behind Charles Leclerc. He's finished almost 20 seconds in front of teammate Lewis Hamilton. Both himself and Hamilton did have a 5-second penalty at the end of the Grand Prix applied. But Russell was in his own race. He started off electric, managing to stay in front of Sergio Perez. A moment where he looked like he may challenge Leclerc on that opening lap, but it never really came to fruition. Nevertheless, kept in touching distance of those front three, but once him and Checo had sorted out their little affair and Perez had got in front of him, it was kind of plain sailing for George, apart from when he came out the pits, went a bit too deep into turn one, and went across turn one, across the chicane, didn't give the place back to Ocon, and got a 5-second penalty for it. A weird one, because it's not actually turned into anything. It's made no difference to his race result. But actually, if there was a late safety car, he could be out the points. So you kind of got to take away a few points for that. But overall, strong weekend for G. Russ this time out. Strong weekend. He needs it after the first half of the season, which was fine. Nothing electric, though. But this weekend's much better. Other side of the garage, it was a bit more of a struggle this weekend for Hamilton, but a strong race in parts. Went brave on the strategy, starting ninth, starting on the hard tyres, Only himself and a couple of others further down the grid decided to go that route. And he went long. He went so long that he was leading the Grand Prix in front of Max Verstappen and was the only one who hadn't come into the pits. Eventually had to go into the mediums and then got after the two McLarens and the Williams of Alex Albon. The 5-second penalty, though, came from that contact with Oscar Piastri. A great fight between the two of them. Hamilton trying for a move into turn 1, going round the outside of Curva Grande. They get to turn 3 and Hamilton just squeezes him a bit too much. Definitely a penalty in my book. Didn't give him enough room. Oscar out of the points, it ruined his race. Penalty fit the crime, and actually for Hamilton, he's lucky it's not affected his Grand Prix in any way. He stays in front of Alex Albon. Then he was able to get past Norris, get past Albon, and 5th and 6th for Mercedes. Not bad. Not great. Not what they want, not what they hope for, but not bad at all. Alex Albon in 7th place. This man in a Williams is pretty unstoppable. It's pretty unstoppable. Another points finish for Alex Albon. This car seems to be coming alive in the hands of Albon. And for 2 weekends in a row, yes, Zandvoort was a bit chaotic, but actually, you look at the underlying pace from quali, 2 weekends in a row, Alex Albon has absolutely smashed it and has really put Williams in such a strong position, not only in terms of getting Q3s, staying inside the top 10 and getting points, but you look at the constructors, they're now 10 points clear of Haas, they're 11 points clear of Alfa Romeo, they're 18 points clear of Alpha Tauri. That's bonkers. Yes, they're a long way off Alpine, but they are behind Alpine in the constructors. Alex Albon in the Drivers' Championship, he is absolutely romping that as well. Up to 13th behind Oscar Piastri and Esteban Ocon. He's only 15 points behind Ocon. I mean, one of the drivers of the year. And I know Williams have been improving. And that car this year is far better than they've had for many, many seasons. But operationally, the way this team are performing, the level they're performing at, it's leagues better than they have done for many a year. And of course, some of this is down to team principal James Vowles. If you've not listened to the Beyond the Grid with James Vowles, it's a really, really insightful podcast. Really enjoyed that one. And his take on the Williams team was such an entertaining listen and informative as well. Really worth a listen if you haven't. But a great day for Alex. And actually, Logan Sargent, and you'll kind of find this while we kind of wrap up the bottom teams in a moment, we didn't see a lot of drivers outside the top 10 because it was just the Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes show today. And Albon and Norris and Piastri a little bit, but we just saw the top 10. That's all we saw in this race. But Sargent, for most of it, was running 11th, was on the fringes of points, but we have had this contact with Valtteri Bottas. And for Sargent, I think all he needed this weekend was a clean weekend. He needed a weekend where maybe if there was a safety car, he was scoring points, but a clean weekend. And we've not ended up with that. So, tricky one to really analyse, and I'm looking forward to seeing the footage of this incident. I'm sure by the time this video is up, it will be out and about on the internet. But for now, I've just got to say, 13th, bit of a meh day again for Logan Sargent. Still waiting for those first F1 points. Norris 8th, Piastri at 12th. It was a similar day for both McLarens, with actually Piastri early doors getting in front of Albon, but they just didn't have the straight line speed, and that cost them in the Grand Prix. Couldn't get past the Williams. Both of them stuck behind, and it wasn't until Hamilton went on that late charge on the mediums where he had contact with Oscar. Oscar did come away with the fastest lap, his first ever in Formula One, and he led a Grand Prix for the first time in Formula One as well. But no points for Piastri after that contact. Couldn't quite catch up with Bottas and Lawson to get into the points. Norris, I think, was a bit frustrated at times today. Will be having nightmares about the size of that Williams rear wing, that's for sure. But again, not a strong weekend for McLaren, and it goes hand in hand with Aston Martin actually, who are next with Alonso in 9th. We didn't see him until those closing stages. Was always in the points, 9th or 10th, but it's just a complete flipping form from McLaren and Aston Martin from Zandvoort. Yes, they're very different circuits, very, very different characteristics. It's tight and twisty and narrow is Zandvoort, and you've got to have such a good downforce package on your car to be able to navigate those corners. Whereas Monza, you've got to have top speed, and you've got to be able to keep the top speed through those high speed corners and not compromise the low speed as best you can. And McLaren and Aston just haven't capitalised on that. So when we go to Singapore next time out, it's a bit of a mixture of both. Traditionally, it's been a high downforce, but actually, now we're losing out that final sector, and it becomes really just a high-speed final sector. It's going to be interesting how that affects the pecking order, and I think maybe we'll bring it all a little bit closer for Singapore in a couple of weekends' time. So that'll be fun. Lance Stroll, I don't really have much to say. A terrible, terrible weekend for Lance Stroll. 20th and last in qualifying, 2/10 off 19th place. Really, really not good enough when your teammates getting through to Q3 in front of quick cars, even in front of some of the slower guys. There's no excuses for Lance Stroll. And in the Grand Prix, only managed to beat the 2 Haas cars, which when we get onto them is no achievement whatsoever. AlphaTauri, mixed fortunes, wasn't it? Liam Lawson, I'd say a pretty great performance today. Much quieter, yes, much quieter than last time out in Zandvoort. He was probably praying just for a quiet race. But to finish 6 seconds off a point, no issues, no spins, no penalties. A really, really solid start to his F1 career. I think he will be in the car for Singapore. That's my gut reaction anyway. For Ricciardo to recover from a wrist injury that quickly, I think, well, it's unlikely, but these guys are superhumans, aren't they? It's unlikely, but you just never know. So I think Lawson deserves that final chance, but I actually think if he doesn't end up in that car, he's given AlphaTauri a lot to think about. Drove a brilliant race today. Other side of the garage, DNS for Yuki Tsunoda caused chaos, didn't he, at the start of the Grand Prix? No one knew what was going on. We had an aborted start, and then we had 19 cars sat on the grid for what seemed like an eternity. Then everyone was allowed back on the grid to look after the cars, and eventually we got going 20 minutes later. I mean, there's got to be no worse feeling, has there? In Formula One, you practice, you do quali, you get to Sunday, and then you don't even start the race, game over. So, very frustrating for Yuki. AlphaTauri, again, is a car that isn't the worst on the grid, but consistently isn't good enough for points. And whereas you've got a Williams and Alfa Romeo scored a point today, I missed out them, I'll talk about them in a moment. Alfa Romeo and Haas that occasionally pick them up here and there, AlphaTauri consistently just don't score points. They're consistently 11th and 12th, which just doesn't help them this year. But Lawson drove great, and Yuki, who's having a great year, didn't have a chance to shine. Bottas, very quiet day. Of course, had this contact with Logan Sargent that earned Sargent a penalty, but that doesn't seem to have affected Bottas because he was almost half a minute behind Fernando Alonso, so that wasn't going to make much of a difference. He was 6 seconds in front of Liam Lawson, and Alfa Romeo come away with a point on a day where they had a beautiful livery, gorgeous livery this weekend, but we didn't get to see it in the Grand Prix. Almost no on-screen footage of the Alfa Romeo today, but a great, well, strong race from Bottas. It's hard to judge when you just don't see them. It really is. And Joe managed to do a 2-stop, but no one on the 2-stop making it through into the points. Risky strategy. Liam Lawson actually was the highest finishing driver on the 2-stop, to note. So actually to finish 6 seconds off points, very good effort from Lawson. But Joe couldn't make it work. Alpine, Gasly 15th, Ocon, DNF, awful. Or it's not even worth talking about, I don't think, with Alpine. nowhere this weekend. That Renault engine just did not have the guts to tackle this circuit. Really disappointing and actually I mean disappointing this time as well, when you consider where they were last weekend and how competitive Gasly looked once he was in that podium places. And Ocon all year has been really consistent. So where this has come from, I think they're scratching their heads a little bit, but an awful weekend for Alpine sees Gasly 15th and Ocon DNF. And finally Haas. Both drivers doing the two-stop because they had to. The tyres just did not last, and it doesn't matter at this point how well the Hulk does in quali or even where K-Mag starts. That car has just gone off the rails bad. The only true drivers to be lapped. It was close for Stroll to be lapped, but it stands that Haas were the only drivers that did actually get lapped. No safety cars to help them out. An awful day for the American team. Before I go then, in my head I planned this to be a quick review. It's not ended up like that, but hey, if you're new around here, that's what happens. And if you're a long-time standing viewer, thank you so much for supporting at the moment. Trying to get back into it. 2 race reviews in a row. It's not happened for a while, has it? But trying to get back into it where I can. And if you have made it this far, it really, really means a lot and makes such a difference for any sort of comment, any sort of like or share. Really does make the difference to us small creators. So thank you if you have indeed done that. But before we go, and this might actually turn your like into a thumbs down if you disagree with me on this, it's Driver of the Day and race rating. Driver of the Day, it's a tricky one because 10 in a row is monstrous. It is. But did Max have to do everything today? Not really. Had a tricky 15 laps and then was just comfortable. Alex Albon made that Williams impossibly wide. Carlos Sainz fought tooth and nail for a podium today. But what I would say with Sainz is it was right on the edge, whereas Sergio Perez, my driver of the day, I think had every single driver trying their best to hold him behind today. And I know Checo finished 6 seconds off his teammate, I know that. But what's just given it the edge for me is that he had to make no mistakes. There was no margin for error for Perez today, whether that be fighting cars into turn 1, fighting cars through Curva Grande into turn 3, whether it be outlaps, making no lockups. Yes, he went over turn 1 a couple of times, but I thought he drove superbly, and I've been harsh on Checo this year. So for once, I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Sergio Perez, my driver of the day. And though it was the Red Bull Ferrari show today, and though I'm a sucker, absolute sucker for seeing the midfield, I love it. I really love seeing the underdogs do well. I really enjoyed today's race. I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. If I'm giving Zandvoort a 9, Monza gets a 7. Monza gets a 7. History in the making, fights all the way through. Not bad at all. And that is it from me for another weekend. I'll see you in 2 weekends' time. I'll actually see you on the Monday. I know, not good. But I'll see you on the Monday after Singapore for a race review on that one. But as always, thank you very much for watching. Like if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you all in the next one.